Echoes of conflict. The New Alexandria station hung in the void of space like a crystalline spider web, its delicate architectural tendrils stretching across multiple gravitational planes. Ambassador Kazi of the Aryan Confederation stood at the central diplomatic hub, their secondary heart racing with a complex mixture of anticipation and dread. The war was over. But for diplomatic species like the Aryans, the aftermath was often more complex than the conflict itself. Kazi's species had evolved on a world of intricate social hierarchies and complex biochemical communication. Their bodies were a marvel of biological engineering, multiple hearts, distributed neural networks, and skin that could shift color and texture to communicate emotions far more nuanced than any verbal language. Right now, those skin patches were flickering between a pale lavender of nervous tension and a mottled gray of professional composure. The station itself was a testament to interstellar cooperation, constructed at the nexus of multiple galactic trade routes. Its architecture reflected the diversity of its creators, crystalline structures from the Met Hal, organic mechanical interfaces from the Silicon Collective, and surprisingly, significant human-inspired design elements that emphasized adaptability over rigid perfection. Ambassador Chen's arrival had been anything but conventional. Where most diplomatic delegations arrived with carefully choreographed protocols and ritualistic movements, Chen had practically sauntered into the station wearing what she called a power suit, a garment that seemed more suited to Earth's corporate boardrooms than interstellar negotiations. "Penny for your thoughts, Ambassador Kazi," Chen had said, her smile both disarming and slightly predatory. Kazi's memory glands involuntarily released a cascade of biochemical recollections. The war had been brutal, but not in any traditional sense. Humanity had demonstrated a form of warfare that defied every established galactic strategic doctrine. The Battle of Proxima remained etched in collective memory. Hegemony battleships, vessels considered technologically invincible, had been systematically disabled not through superior weaponry, but through psychological manipulation. Human ships had transmitted thousands of hours of what they called cat videos to overload and crash the hegemony's predictive AI systems. Then there was the infamous psychological warfare tactic that had truly terrified the galactic powers, broadcasting Earth's reality television on all frequencies, causing mass confusion and psychological destabilization among the strictly logical hegemony forces. Humans had essentially weaponized their own cultural chaos. Ambassador Chen represented this unpredictability perfectly. While other diplomats adhered to millennia-old communication protocols, she seemed to operate on an entirely different wavelength, part strategic genius, part cultural provocateur. The Aryan Confederation maintains the highest respect for humanity's creative problem-solving abilities, Kazi had carefully stated through their advanced translation systems. Chen's laugh was sharp, unexpected. "Creative is one way to put it. Our fleet admiral preferred the term batshit insane, but it works." The upcoming diplomatic summit would determine whether humanity would be integrated into the broader galactic community as a respected entity or contained as an unpredictable variable. And somehow, Ambassador Chen seemed more interested in solving a handheld puzzle, Rubik's Cube, than the fate of her entire species. Kazi's third stomach began producing anxiety acids. This was going to be a long negotiation. Little did they know, the most extraordinary demonstration of human capability was about to unfold, a mathematical challenge that would redefine interstellar diplomacy forever. The Quantum Conundrum. The diplomatic chamber fell into an expectant silence as Supreme Calculator VRA of the Met Hal delegation stepped forward. Their crystalline exoskeleton refracted the station's ambient lighting, creating a mesmerizing display of mathematical precision that was both beautiful and deeply intimidating. Lieutenant James Rodriguez adjusted the collar of his dress uniform, feeling distinctly out of place among the array of alien diplomats. He'd never expected his art history degree to be anything more than a conversation starter, let alone a potential diplomatic weapon. "We challenge the human delegation," VRA announced, their translation matrix rendering the words with clinical exactitude, to solve the quantum entanglement probability matrix of the 9th degree. Ambassador Sarah Chen, still fiddling with her now-solved Rubik's Cube, looked up with an expression that Rodriguez had come to recognize, equal parts mischief and calculated intelligence. The quantum entanglement matrix was legendary among galactic scientific circles. It was more than just a mathematical problem, it was a computational gauntlet that had driven entire AI collectives into recursive loops of computational madness. The Silicon Collective had spent 3 full solar cycles just attempting to process its basic parameters. Rodriguez leaned closer to Chen. "You do realize what they're doing, right?" he whispered. Chen's smile was razor-sharp. Presenting a challenge designed to be impossible. Classic diplomatic power play. The Met-Hal delegation's challenge was multilayered. On the surface, it appeared to be a pure mathematical exercise. But diplomatic observers like Ambassador Kazi understood the deeper implications. Failure to engage or solve the matrix would be interpreted as intellectual weakness, potentially devastating humanity's emerging galactic reputation. The matrix materialized in the chamber's central holographic space, a hyperdimensional construct that seemed to pulse with its own internal logic. Quantum threads interconnected in patterns that defied traditional computational approaches, creating a mathematical labyrinth that would make even the most advanced AI systems tremble. Most species would approach such a challenge with arrays of quantum computers, neural network clusters, or advanced computational matrices. The Met-Hal expected nothing less. Instead, Rodriguez pulled out a pencil. A collective gasp rippled through the diplomatic chamber. Physical writing implements were considered primitive, almost barbaric in an age of quantum computing and neural interfaces. The Met-Hal delegation's crystalline surfaces began shifting in patterns that suggested a mixture of confusion and growing irritation. "You can't be serious," Kazi hissed, their protective diplomatic instincts going into overdrive. Chen simply winked. "Watch and learn." Rodriguez's approach was anything but conventional. Where computational systems would attempt to solve the matrix through pure mathematical precision, he began treating it like a complex visual puzzle. His art history background kicked in, approaching the holographic construct as Renaissance artists might have approached a challenging perspective drawing. "It's all about how you look at the problem," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The Met-Hal delegation's leader, VRA, was practically vibrating with mathematical indignation. "This is not the proper approach. The matrix demands computational precision." Chen's response was characteristically human. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. As Rodriguez sketched, something extraordinary began to happen. His seemingly random lines and connections started revealing underlying patterns that no quantum computer had previously detected. He was essentially reading the matrix like a complex piece of art, finding relationships and symmetries that pure computational logic had missed. Kazi watched in fascination and horror. The diplomatic implications were staggering. If Rodriguez could solve this matrix through a completely unconventional method, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about intelligence, computation, and problem-solving across multiple galactic civilizations. The station's observation systems began registering anomalies. The matrix was responding. Not just processing, but actively transforming in response to Rodriguez's artistic approach. Lieutenant Rodriguez continued humming what he called elevator music, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was potentially rewriting several fundamental laws of mathematical diplomacy. Behind him, Chen was recording everything on her smartphone. "This is definitely going to break the internet," she muttered. "Space Reddit is going to lose its collective mind." The diplomatic chamber held its collective breath. Quantum threads began realigning, mathematical constructs shifting in ways that defied every known computational model. Rodriguez was solving the unsolvable, not through brute computational force, but through a uniquely human combination of creativity, perspective, and sheer audacious imagination. And they were just getting started. Reverberations of disruption. The aftermath of Rodriguez's quantum matrix solution sent shockwaves through the diplomatic station that extended far beyond the immediate conference chamber. What had begun as a seemingly impossible mathematical challenge had transformed into a pivotal moment of interstellar diplomacy. In the station's high-security communication hub, encrypted transmissions began flooding in from across the known galaxy. The Met-Hel delegation's complete computational silence following the Matrix resolution was itself a form of communication, a stunned, near-traumatic response that spoke volumes. Ambassador Kazi found themselves in an unprecedented position. Their role had always been to mediate, to smooth over potential conflicts, to interpret the complex biochemical and linguistic nuances that could spark interstellar incidents. But humanity continued to defy every established diplomatic protocol. This wasn't just solving a mathematical problem, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, James's sister and a renowned xenopsychologist, explained to the gathered diplomatic advisors. Her holographic projection flickered slightly, a testament to the communication relays stretching across multiple star systems. This was a fundamental reimagining of problem-solving itself. The Rodriguez siblings represented something uniquely human, a combination of artistic creativity and scientific pragmatism that had become humanity's most potent diplomatic weapon. Where traditional species saw boundaries, humans saw opportunities. Where others perceived rigid systems, humans saw malleable frameworks waiting to be challenged. Supreme Calculator VRA of the Met-Hel delegation had retreated to their private communication sphere, their crystalline structure now a muted, almost translucent gray, a color that in their species signified deep existential recalibration. The quantum matrix solution hadn't just been a mathematical defeat, it was a fundamental challenge to their entire philosophical understanding of intelligence and problem-solving. Ambassador Chen, characteristically, was more interested in the immediate practical implications. So, she said, leaning back in her chair and pulling up a holographic display of trade route proposals, shall we discuss economic integration? The conference room erupted in a mixture of nervous laughter and genuine shock. Chen's ability to transition from a world-altering mathematical solution to routine diplomatic negotiations was itself a form of psychological warfare. Lieutenant Rodriguez, still dressed in his formal uniform but looking slightly uncomfortable, interjected. Ma'am, perhaps we should give them a moment to process. Chen's smile was razor-sharp. Processing is for computers, Rodriguez. Diplomacy is for people. Behind the scenes, more complex negotiations were unfolding. The quantum matrix solution had inadvertently exposed significant vulnerabilities in the computational systems of multiple galactic civilizations. The methyls predictive algorithms, which had been considered the most advanced in known space, had been completely outmaneuvered by a method that wasn't just unconventional, it was fundamentally alien in its approach. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research suggested this was part of a broader human characteristic. We don't just solve problems, she had written in her groundbreaking xenopsychological text, Interstellar Humanity, Beyond Conventional Thinking. We redefine the very nature of the problem itself. Kazi's diplomatic database was struggling to categorize the event. The matrix solution defied every established protocol of scientific and mathematical engagement. It wasn't just a solution, it was a complete paradigm shift. The station's communication networks were abuzz. The Aryan Confederation's diplomatic corps was sending encrypted messages asking for detailed analysis. The Silicon Collective was requesting comprehensive data packages. Even the usually isolationist hegemony was showing unprecedented interest. Underneath it all, a more profound transformation was occurring. Humanity was being recognized not just as a military power, which they had demonstrated during the war, but as an intellectual force capable of challenging fundamental galactic assumptions. Ambassador Chen turned to Rodriguez, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Next up, trade negotiations with the Mexel delegation. I've got a strategy that's going to blow their collective minds. Rodriguez looked simultaneously terrified and intrigued. Should I be worried? Always, Chen responded with a wink. But that's what makes it interesting. As the diplomatic station continued to process the quantum matrix event, one thing became increasingly clear: humanity had once again demonstrated that their greatest strength wasn't in their technology, their weapons, or their computational power. Their greatest strength was their ability to look at the universe in a way no one else could, sideways, upside down, and completely unexpected. And they were just getting started. Economic warfare and cultural chess. The Mexel trade delegation arrived with all the subtlety of a quantum hurricane. Their biochemical negotiators were renowned across the galaxy for their ability to manipulate economic systems with the precision of a surgical instrument. Where most species saw trade routes, the Mexels saw complex mathematical probability webs, living, breathing ecosystems of economic potential. Ambassador Sarah Chen had other plans. The Kansas City Shuffle, she muttered, reviewing her notes as Lieutenant Rodriguez looked on with a mixture of fascination and barely concealed terror. Ambassador Kazi, who had been assigned as a neutral observer, felt their multiple hearts begin a synchronized panic rhythm. The Mexel were not a species that appreciated surprises. Their entire cultural and economic system was built on predictive modeling so precise that most other civilizations considered it nearly prescient. The negotiation chamber was a marvel of architectural engineering. Holographic displays shifted and morphed, creating three-dimensional economic models that danced with impossible complexity. Mexel representatives, beings of pure energy contained within intricate crystalline exoskeletons, moved with a mathematical grace that made human movement look chaotic by comparison. We have identified the optimal trade configuration for quantum crystalline processing, the lead Mexel negotiator, designated XN7, announced. Their voice was a perfect algorithmic modulation, devoid of emotion, pure computational precision. Chen's smile was anything but precise. Actually, she said, pulling up a series of seemingly random historical economic data from Earth, I'd like to discuss something called arbitrage. The word itself seemed to cause a momentary flutter in the Mexel delegation's energy patterns. Arbitrage was an ancient human economic strategy, exploiting price differences in different markets. To the Mexel, it was simultaneously fascinating and deeply offensive. Their entire economic model was built on eliminating such inefficiencies. Rodriguez leaned closer to Kazi. She's going to do something crazy, isn't she? Kazi's translator struggled to convey the complex biochemical cocktail of emotions, fear, anticipation, and a strange sense of professional admiration. The human strategy was elegantly brutal. Chen wasn't just presenting a traditional trade proposal. She was demonstrating a completely different approach to economic interaction, one that treated economic systems as living, breathing entities rather than static mathematical models. Your predictive models, Chen explained, her fingers dancing across holographic displays, assume perfect information and rational actors. But what if I told you that's not how real economic systems work? The Mexel delegation's energy patterns began to pulse with an unusual frequency, confusion mixed with growing intellectual excitement. Chen's presentation was a masterclass in economic judo. She wasn't fighting the Mexel's complex models, she was using their own complexity against them. By introducing seemingly random human economic behaviors, she was creating computational blind spots that the Mexel's predictive systems couldn't easily map. Lieutenant Rodriguez recognized the strategy immediately. It was remarkably similar to how they had approached the quantum matrix challenge, not by confronting the system directly, but by introducing an entirely new perspective. It's like Renaissance art, he whispered to Kazi. Sometimes you have to change the entire frame of reference to see the real picture. The Mexel delegation's computational cores began running multiple simultaneous scenario projections. Their energy patterns shifted through countless permutations, blue, violet, a strange iridescent green that suggested deep computational stress. Ambassador Kazi watched in professional fascination. This wasn't just a trade negotiation. This was a fundamental reimagining of economic interaction. XN7's response came after what seemed like an eternity, but was in reality just 7.3 standard seconds, an extraordinarily long time for a Mexel computational response. Your proposal requires further analysis. To any other species, this would sound like a polite rejection. But Kazi recognized it for what it truly was, a mexile admission of intellectual surrender. Chen's wink was almost imperceptible. Shall we discuss implementation? As the negotiations continued, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity wasn't just participating in galactic civilization. They were fundamentally reshaping its understanding of possibility. And they were just getting started. Convergence and transformation. The new Alexandria station had witnessed countless diplomatic milestones, but nothing could have prepared its quantum-reinforced infrastructure for what was about to unfold. The events of the past solar cycles had transformed humanity from a newly discovered species to the most unpredictable variable in galactic politics. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the comprehensive Interstellar Diplomatic Symposium, her holographic presentation casting intricate shadows across the assembled representatives of nearly 24 galactic civilizations. Behind her, a dynamic display chronicled humanity's improbable journey, from a relatively young species to a diplomatic force that had systematically dismantled every established expectation. Adaptation is not just a strategy, she began, her voice carrying the calm precision of a scientist and the passionate undertone of a revolutionary, it is the fundamental language of intelligence. The symposium hall was a marvel of interstellar architecture, a space that could simultaneously accommodate beings of vastly different physiological and computational requirements. Crystalline metal delegates sat alongside energy-based silicon collective representatives. Biochemical communicators from the Aryan Confederation maintained diplomatic proximity to quantum-entangled hegemony observers. At the front table, Ambassador Sarah Chen and Lieutenant James Rodriguez represented humanity, not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous, adaptive thinkers. Ambassador Kazi, whose diplomatic career had been defined by mediation and careful protocol, found themselves in an unprecedented role. They were no longer just an observer but a key architect of a new interstellar understanding. The quantum matrix solution, the economic negotiations with the mexile, the psychological warfare during the previous conflict, these were not isolated incidents. They were manifestations of a fundamental human characteristic that defied traditional galactic comprehension. We propose, Dr. Rodriguez continued, her presentation shifting to show complex interaction models, not a treaty, but a new framework of interspecies engagement we call the Humanity Protocols. The protocols were radical. They rejected the rigid, predictive models that had governed interstellar interactions for millennia. Instead, they proposed a dynamic, adaptive approach that recognized complexity as a feature, not a bug. Lieutenant Rodriguez's art history background played a crucial role in the presentation. He demonstrated how human problem-solving drew inspiration from artistic movements, the Renaissance's perspective shifts, Cubism's multiple viewpoints, Surrealism's rejection of linear logic. These were not just artistic concepts but fundamental approaches to understanding complexity. Supreme Calculator VRA of the Met Hal delegation, who had previously been humiliated by the quantum matrix incident, now listened with what could only be described as professional respect. Their crystalline structure pulsed with computational curiosity. The Humanity Protocols proposed something revolutionary, that intelligence was not about finding the most efficient solution, but about continuously reimagining the problem itself. Ambassador Chen's contribution was characteristically direct. "We're not asking to be accepted," she stated, her power suit a stark contrast to the elaborate diplomatic attire surrounding her. "We're offering a new way of thinking." The symposium hall fell into a profound silence. This was more than a diplomatic proposal. This was an intellectual revolution. Ambassador Kazi's translation matrix worked overtime, capturing the nuanced biochemical and energy-based communications happening simultaneously. Excitement, fear, curiosity, these emotions transcended species. As the final presentations concluded, something extraordinary happened. The representatives began to engage, not through formal diplomatic channels, but through genuine intellectual exchange. The hegemony's quantum analysts discussed artistic perspective with Rodriguez. The Silicon Collective's computational theorists debated adaptive strategies with Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential conflict into an opportunity for collective reimagining. In the observation lounge, as the formal proceedings concluded, Lieutenant Rodriguez turned to Ambassador Chen. "Did we just change everything?" Chen's smile was both a weapon and a promise. "We're just getting started." Outside the station's massive viewports, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, as if taking a collective breath, preparing for the next chapter of a story that was only beginning to be told. The Humanity Protocols were more than a diplomatic document. They were an invitation, to think differently, to see beyond established boundaries, to recognize that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology, not computational precision, but the audacious ability to imagine something entirely new. Humanity had arrived. And the galaxy would never be the same.